while the post office maintained that you'd stolen the money and you maintained that you didn't, did anybody ever provide any proof that you'd taken the money, that how you'd spent it, what you'd done with this £11,503 and 28 pence that you had allegedly taken?
No, nothing at all. The post office didn't even search my property. I didn't have nobody coming into my home checking that I had any money stashed away anywhere in my house. There was never, they had access to bank accounts for myself and for my partner at the time, John Banks. They had everything that they needed, and there was no evidence of that money being traced anywhere or being found, nothing at all. So it was just literally down to my signature on paperwork. Right,
so there's no proof you'd taken the money. They've only got your signature on the paperwork, which is in line with your concerns that there'd been a mistake on the computer, or there was no explanation for the money going. Your family come up with the missing sum. The judge has hinted that may lead to reduced or non-custodial sentence. Did you walk free at that point?
No, I didn't. I remember it like it was yesterday because it still haunts me. I went into Guildford Court and the judge actually stood there and asked me to apologise, which I refused to do. He had told me that I'd stolen from old age pensioners and basically said that even though my family had paid back £11,503.28 that I was accused of stealing, I was to have 6 months custodial sentence.
How was that for you? Where did you go?
I went to Holloway Prison.
That's tough. That is a tough place.
Yeah, it's... I will never... It's very hard to explain. I don't think you can ever explain exactly what it's like. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy.
When I listened to the Prime Minister, well, I kind of listened to it. I got a little bit annoyed, so I kind of switched it off. But she did, she did a little bit to camera about sort of legacy and
she's obsessed with legacy, isn't she?
She's trying to leave a positive legacy behind, let's say,
as opposed to an actual legacy, which is screwing up Brexit.
So, a legacy of failure that she leaves behind, and then it culminates with Boris. But anyway, but I think this. What
was she was trying to do is get men to take 12 weeks paternity. That was her bid today for legacy.
Yeah. I mean, she's got to try every day to try and carve out a legacy. I mean, Hammond threatened apparently to resign because she's spending all this money that he hasn't accounted for. So apparently he threatened to resign. But in regards to Windrush, what I'd like her to do, the Prime Minister, in her last 4 weeks as Prime Minister, is to clear all of the outstanding Windrush cases. Now,
How
in
many
2018,
are there, do we know?
Well, we still don't know, but there is at least a few hundred. Yeah. And in 2018, Amber Rudd said it will take a couple of weeks.
That's right.
And we're like over a year and a few weeks down the road. So the Prime Minister wants a legacy, clear the outstanding cases, all of these indefinite leave to remains and British citizenship. Just complete all the paperwork. Stop all of the anguish that's going on from these people who are still waiting to hear about their cases and their status, and give them their proper status. And that's it. We could the compensation, fair enough, will take a little while. But in terms of the status of those people that are still waiting in the system, the Prime Minister can ensure that they are cleared like she promised over a year ago.
You'll be delighted to hear that we've just started the ball rolling on a Windrush special for this show, actually taking in... I want to get the stories of first generation, also second and possibly third generationers as well, to hear what kind of legacy, if we're going to use the L word, Windrush carries with it, which should be fascinating.
Because actually what's happened, and since the Windrush scandal, is this trauma that's been reignited in the people that first came, the Windrush generation, in the 40s and the 50s. They had this trauma of being racially abused, and that trauma has been reignited. Yeah. And that trauma now has been fed down generations, because you've got children who are watching their parents, and all their anguish of being traumatized about being called an illegal alien when they're a British citizen. They're having to watch all of that and go through all of that. So there is this real kind of fundamental situation that we have to resolve, and the Prime Minister can do something about that. Forget the statue and the monument. That can wait. I don't care if that never happens. But what I do care is that the lives of people who she was traumatised through her hostile environment, and yes, we can argue, oh, yes, it started years ago, but actually it was deliberately enforced under her government, under her watch as the Home Secretary and under her government as Prime Minister.
She was quite open about the hostile environment. You know, she was driving
proud of
fans
it.
around in your manner.
Proud of it. Yeah.
It's a public interest, Kevin. He's the future Prime Minister.
Do caring neighbours go to the Guardian?
Because
they don't.
Kevin, you go to the police, and then what you do with the story thereafter, as a member of this country in a free society, is your own affair. And if it involves the Prime Minister of this country,
I
can't believe you're even going to argue that.
You're going to get investigated.
But
that's different from being slandered, run down, diminished, and rubbished. You know, lefty Remainers with a political agenda. There's no evidence of a political agenda. The only evidence is that they were concerned enough to raise the alarm, having gone up and knocked on the door and had no response on 3 occasions.
Are you surprised what happened to them?
I'm disappointed that people who do the right thing are rubbish. No, but that's not to say that we shouldn't stand up and challenge it.
I don't think it is the right thing for a neighbour to take a story to the Guardian.
What, when it involves the future Prime Minister of the country possibly being involved in domestic violence?
You ought to be a little more pleasant to your neighbours. You've called the police.
No, but you're missing out that the neighbour is the future Prime Minister of the country, and therefore there is an overwhelming case of public interest, because the public, including 160,000 members of the Conservative Party, are about to choose whether this person should be our next Prime Minister, and therefore probity would suggest that we should know what this person gets up to at 1 o'clock in the morning when the police are called.
I'm just not saying that all that many neighbours would behave in that way.
Oh, I think with Boris as your neighbour, I think you probably wouldn't you? You wouldn't call the press.
No, I would.
There we go.
There we go. Quid out of it.
Do or die on departing by Halloween.
That's the strongest line we've had from Boris Johnson yet. That's his most committed and definite line to taking the UK out of the European Union.
Can we trust him on it? I mean, can we trust him on a word he actually says about anything?
Well, do or die seems to be staking his premiership on it. I invited him to suggest that he would resign if he's unable to deliver Brexit on October the 31st. He stepped away from doing that explicitly, but he did say it was important for trust in politics to be restored. Suggesting that you want to leave the European Union, do or die by October the 31st is a pretty big bar. So is saying you will not have changes to the political declaration. It's got to be a change to the withdrawal agreement. That's a high bar. And another very, very high bar to set, absolutely, of course, is to say that the agreement has got to be changed in the face of uncertainty about the European Union agreeing to that. He outlined what he called Brexit plans A, B and C. Yeah. I asked for plan B. The reality is we just know from that interview, what we can definitely know is that Boris Johnson has pinned himself to leaving the European Union on October the 31st, and that may very well be a hostage to fortune. I think the really telling thing really from that interview overall is simply that Boris Johnson, first of all, pinned himself absolutely to leaving on the 31st of October, that he categorically ruled out for the first time an extension to Article 50. So this is shutting down options, okay? This is shutting down options in that interview. And this interview will come back in October when those options may very well still be the only ones on the table. So he's absolutely categorically ruled out extending Article 50 any further, said that do or die, we're leaving on October the 31st. That leads you to suspect that this is no deal or a Boris Johnson deal, which means changing the withdrawal agreement, not the political declaration. So a real change to the agreement that the EU has already set its face against. It seems like a very potential road with lots of blocked avenues.
Do we need to put social class right up there alongside people's ethnicity, their religion, their sexual persuasion, orientation?
Yeah, and the answer to that is yes, we do. So look, I think there's a hell of a long way to go. Look at the gender pay gap. You know, there's still a big difference between how men are paid and women are paid. We know that there's still racial discrimination and outright racism, but that still is pervasive. But nonetheless, there has been progress. Where, frankly, there has been less progress is on social class. And one of the reasons for that, I think, is that it's pretty obvious who is a woman, who's a man, who's black, who's white, and it's less obvious where you come from. So transparency, you know, remember when we started to shine a spotlight on all this and just say to people, hey, just take a look at the statistics around gender pay. Or are people who are from a black and ethnic minority background getting the same life chances as people from a white background? No, they're not. That data exists. Part of the problem is we don't really collect the data. For example, in workplaces about where have you come from.
No.
What we do know is this, however, that if you are from a working class background and you're fortunate enough to get into a professional job, to become a lawyer or a doctor or an accountant or whatever, and if you're doing the same job as someone from a middle class background, nonetheless you're paid about £7,000 a year less.
Yes.
7,000 quid a year less. So what's going on, guys? I mean, really, if that were happening with women, there would be an outrage.
Absolutely.
Rightly.
Right, absolutely.
If it was happening with people from a black or ethnic minority background, there would be outrage. Yes. Rightly. And there should be outrage. Because it's a social injustice and it's not fair.
How radically different is what Boris proposes to the current system for non-EU migrants?
Well, we do have a point system in place at the moment.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, it's actually called the points-based system as well. and for short, we call it PBS. Even the form is called PBS. We currently have a system in place. The same system was used for the students, and certain sections of them have been closed now. So the entrepreneur section has been closed recently of that. Certain conditions have changed onto it. The entrepreneur, like I said, section has been closed, and the student system has been made tougher. Before, the system really sort of would let everyone down in the fact that it didn't require students to speak English to come over here.
Yeah.
So, and there was a lot of abuse of the system. But now, slowly, after about 8 odd years, we've realised, hold on, that the system has been abused. So let's try and tighten the loopholes. But yeah, we already have a points-based system. The only thing the Australian one is it's slightly tougher, and the Australians get to pick and choose who they let in. In our one, we don't really get to pick and choose who we let in.
What are the flaws with the system as it stands for non-EU migrants?
Okay, the flaws are it's quite open to abuse in the fact that the old HSMP system, which is called a highly skilled migrant program, that was abused a lot. And if you made the points, you had to be let in. There was no discretion. There was no discretion in selection. There were no interviews as to whether the person was capable to come and be a teacher here if he's been let in as a teacher. What happened was people were let in on the profession that they were doing. When they came here, they found they couldn't get the job, so they started working in supermarkets and started working as salesmen and started doing unskilled jobs. And that wasn't checked up on. So there was no monitoring of the scheme. Once someone gets here, there's no monitoring. Just like the students, when they came over, there was no monitoring that, are they still at uni? Have they gone back? This country's main problem is we don't have exit controls.
Well, Theresa May, lest we forget our outgoing Prime Minister, when she was Home Secretary, fired loads of border guards, didn't she? Which seemed a bizarre move to reduce the controls, the actual physical human controls we have at various points of entry in the UK at a time of concerns about migration. It seemed completely counterintuitive to me.
Exactly. And it's, she took a hard line and she's asking, instead of border guards, she's asking bank managers, doctors, landlords to do immigration's job. And employers, because now everyone in the public is supposed to be checking other people's visas. Are these people allowed to rent a house here? Are these people open? Can they open a bank?
Very good point.
NHS. So it was almost asking the public to police migrants instead of immigration.
Very good point.
And and the system's still in place.
The Stonewall pioneers, of which I was one, we very much had a vision of changing society. We didn't want equality within the status quo because we saw the status quo as being flawed, imperfect, not the ideal. So we had the vision of let's change society. Don't conform to society as it is. Let's work with others to change society for the betterment of everyone, including for straight people. Now, this is the thing. We saw the injustice, the poverty, the unemployment, the racism, the lack of women's rights. We said, why don't we all get together and work collectively to change society? Now, I think today the LGBT plus movement has lost that vision. It's very much concerned with equality within the status quo. And I would say that for the status quo, it's far from perfect, even for straight people. So you look at, for example, sex and relationship education in our schools. We know that young people, whether they're gay or straight, say that it's not good enough. It's not giving them the information they need to protect themselves and to have happy, healthy relationships. So I've been championing the idea that instead of just saying we want equal relationship and sex education for LGBT plus people, I've been saying let's have better quality relationship and sex education for all young kids so we can reduce the number of unwanted pregnancies and abortions, cut the level of HIV, reduce domestic violence and sexual abuse. We can work together to make things better for everyone. And this vision has been lost by a lot of people in the LGBT plus community. They're very much focused on LGBT issues and LGBT rights. And they forget that other people, other communities, also sometimes get a very raw deal, and that we should be better off working together to uplift the whole of humanity.
Just so I'm clear in my own mind, I mean, Stonewall, would you accept that Stonewall broadly does a good job looking after the LGBT plus community? The LGBT community still needs people to look after it, to guard against government and others that may do the community harm. But your ambition post the Stonewall Inn riot was for a much broader, a broader change. Does that sound right?
It was.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Stonewall, the organisation in Britain today, does great work, but it's very different from the Stonewall uprising in 1969. It is basically seeking accommodation within the status quo, within what exists. It wants equal rights based on the current laws, values, institutions. Whereas the Stonewall people were saying, and I was saying, and I'm still saying, let's change the laws, let's change the values, let's change the institutions to make life better for everyone, whether they're LGBT plus or straight, whether they're sexually active or asexual or celibate. Our agenda was, and my agenda still is, empowerment and liberation for everyone. So I always saw LGBT plus rights as part of the spectrum of human rights, and that all human rights are important, and that LGBT plus people should work with others to ensure universal human rights for everyone.